All right, everyone. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 2 of the Articulate Women podcast. I am Melissa, and I'm here with my bestie, Desiree, my co-host.
Hi.
And today we are continuing our conversation of parables, which we will be covering all season long.
Yes.
And today we are talking about the parable of the sower, which is a fabulous parable. And it kind of goes along with what we started above last week when we talked about the parable of the 10 virgins. And it talks about really being ready to hear what the Lord has to say to us.
It's true. And it goes into some really, we've got some cool insights that maybe you wouldn't have thought of, because actually I didn't think of it until I read the parable again. But the parable is in Matthew chapter 13, correct?
It is in Matthew 13. That's correct. It's also in two other spots. If you want to look, it's in Mark 4 and Luke 8.
Oh.
And fun fact, there are no parables in the book of John because it's more about his interpretation of the gospel. So the parables are only in Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Oh, I did not know that. That is a fun fact.
Yeah.
I wonder how many people.
Yeah, so if you're trying to search for parables in John, you're
don't.
Don't. Okay, so parable of the sower. We're gonna refer to Matthew 13 because it's got some good stuff in there.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not a lot of difference between the gospels on this. So we'll just start right in here.
Basically, what I got from this is he's telling these parables, and then somewhere in here they ask, "Hey, Lord, why are you telling us these parables?" And we'll get into that. But it's basically about these seeds, about seeds being sown, which is basically planted, right?
Yeah. So the parable or the metaphor comes from how the seeds land in certain types of soil.
Mm-hmm.
And so we as people and followers of Christ are the types of soil, and the seed is going to be the messages that Christ has for us.
Right. And so he talks about here so I'm going to just start in verse 1. So it says, "The same day Jesus went out of the house and sat by the seaside, and great multitudes were gathered together, so people came to listen to him. It says, Behold, a sower went forth to sow. And when he sowed, some seeds fell by the wayside, and the fowls came and devoured them up." So what do you think of that? He sowed some seeds, they fell by the wayside, and the fowls came and devoured them up. What do you think it means by the fowls devouring them up? Are they being devoured because the fowls are people devouring up the word, or is it because those seeds are being destroyed?
So I think about a couple different things. Like if you were to plant a seed and the fowls come and get them,
Mm-hmm.
the first thing is that they're shallow enough that a bird can get the seed.
Okay.
So they're not planted well.
Right.
And the next thing it makes me think about is that something else exterior to the teachings of the gospel is affecting how we absorb the gospel truths.
I like
so
that.
Two verses come to mind. The first is 2 Timothy 3, verse 7. And this is Paul's letter to Timothy. And he says that, let's go back actually. In verse 2, it says that in the last days, for men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, and it just goes on and on.
And how much are we seeing of that now?
Yes, a lot. And in verse 4, it says lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. So the focus is externally, not on the planting of the seed, but of what it's going on elsewhere.
Right.
So it makes sense that a bird would come and disrupt the pattern of being able to let the seed be planted in our hearts.
Right.
So verse 7 really came to my mind because it says that people will be ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth.
Oh.
And so the idea of letting other pursuits and other knowledge outside of the gospel be more important, or take that seed and say, and look at it through a secular lens and discount it perhaps.
Right. Kind of like what secularism does.
Yeah.
It basically says, oh yeah, we can accept all these different things, but it's not from God. It can be from something else.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. And then the next verse that I thought of was in the Book of Mormon in 2 Nephi chapter 9. In verse 28, it says that in the last days, it says, "Oh, the cunning plan of the evil one. Oh, the vainness and the frailties and the foolishness of men. When they are learned, they think they are wise, and they hearken not unto the counsels of God, for they set it aside, and perhaps don't plant it in the right part of the garden, where the bird can come and grab it,
right?
Supposing they know for themselves."
Well, because these are it's not sounding like these were planted at all, because it literally says seeds fell by the wayside, meaning maybe they were dropped, or maybe they were, they weren't even intentionally planted.
Yeah, not purposeful at all.
Yeah.
And so maybe taking the teachings of the gospel and just kind of tossing them aside in favor of something else.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it makes me think of how we relate to the importance that we give the gospel and how we let it sink into our hearts. Because if we're putting worldly things ahead of it, or secular things, not even just bad things, but just like other things that are good but not gospel related, we can get distracted, and that the power of the gospel will not sink into our hearts.
Well, and that's a good point, because there's a lot of things that we learn in this world and they're not bad. Learning is good, and a lot of people have a lot of knowledge, and Heavenly Father encourages us to learn what we can here, right? But it's the putting that above the gospel. It's putting that above our knowledge of. It's not that learning is bad, or that these secular things or the things that we experience in the world are necessarily bad, but it's when we put it above.
Yeah, absolutely. It's when our priorities are not aligned to the gospel.
Right.
Absolutely. One thing that we looked at was the talk given by President Oakes in April of 2015, just entitled "The Parable of the Sower." And he does not talk much about this section. He's very President Oakesy in this moment. He says, "Thus the seeds that fell by the wayside have not reached mortal soil where they might possibly grow. They are like teachings that fall upon a heart hardened, or unprepared." And then he says, very President Oakesy, "I will say nothing more of these."
Wow. So it's literally like when the seeds that fell by the wayside, or when people are preaching the word, or maybe a missionary comes and knocks on the door, and they just say no thank you and close the door.
Yeah, and it just goes straight over their head.
Yeah.
Or if my gamble to say that, like, if you're in church or conference and you're like, that doesn't apply to me. And you're like, I don't need to listen to that. That's for my neighbor over here who needs to be better at that. And so we want to make sure that our ears are open to hear what we need to hear, even if it's something hard.
And that we don't want to hear, which oftentimes it is. Like the messages that are given out, have you ever found, like, even in, like, I don't know, testimony meetings or church talks or even conferences, where somebody has spoken something that you really, really needed to hear?
Oh, absolutely.
And that you maybe didn't want to hear.
So I will share this experience that I had this week, which I haven't told you about yet. You'll get to hear it for the first time. It's the Lord chastised me a little bit, which he hasn't done in a while.
Oh.
So those of you who've been around know that I'm a single mom, and it's hard. We all know that. I have a pattern of being late to church with an excuse of I have children, I'm a single mom, and I do it all by myself.
Yep.
But I also remember that when I was a married single mom, as in I still was the only one getting the kids ready for church without his help, that I could be on time. And so we were driving up to church, and I had done better that morning and, like, had made a better effort to be on time. But it's still, there's always stuff with kids. They need a snack. They have to go potty. They want their favorite toy, whatever it is. And so I didn't build enough time in the morning to make sure we could be on time. And so I'm driving up to the church, and I'm, like, pulling into the parking lot, and I'm, like, just kind of thinking, like, I've been a single mom for 4 years. I think I have this figured out.
Yeah.
And I'm still late.
Yeah.
And the Spirit was like, you can do better. And I was just like, I'm sorry. In that moment, I was like, I need to repent for being late to church.
Well, and, as I think it was a talk that Holland gave at one point, where he was like, We all understand that every once in a while your ox gets stuck in the mire or
Yeah.
something like that. But if your ox is continually stuck in the mire, maybe you should try a different road.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And I realized that I was not making a good enough effort. And especially after what we talked about last time, that our goal in being a disciple of Jesus Christ is to have a relationship with Jesus. And if I'm late to my friend's house on a weekly basis, that does not foster a close relationship.
right.
Like, if I'm late for people in my life, they don't like it. Cough, cough, Desiree. So I realized that I was giving myself too much of a window of getting through a hard period in my life, because my life is pretty good right now and I don't have a lot of trials, knock on wood. And I should be able to make this one little area of my life better and repent a little bit for not, prioritizing getting up a little earlier and getting the kids ready faster and all of those things. And just the idea that that relationship can be strengthened when I do those things on purpose. I think for me, what happened is that, like, I get to the point where all the major struggles in my life are figured out. And so this is a point where I need to figure out what else I can do to be better. And that repentance is a constant thing.
Yes.
It's not just about big things. And for me right now anyway, repentance is about not being late to church.
Yeah, being
and,
better.
And having that little bit of time to listen to the prelude music and all of that, and making time to, like, show my kids that we respect Christ enough to be on time.
Right. Yeah.
And that does make a difference. And I was glad that I had a soft enough heart to realize that I could do better.
Yeah. I'm proud of you for that.
Oh, thank you.
I'll still save you a seat, though.
I know.
Okay, so we're going on. Those are the ones that fell by the wayside, right?
Yes.
And then it says this is verse 5. It says, some fell upon stony places where they had not much earth, and forthwith they sprung up because they had no deepness of earth. So, like, if they fall in the stony places, like, that's concrete.
Yep.
Right? But it could go in the crack of a sidewalk and still spring something up, but it won't have a deep root, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what that's saying, right? Because then in verse 6 it says, and when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. So something did spring up, but then when the sun hit it, they died.
President Oakes talks about this in his talks, that a lot of times this happens with new members or members who are not totally committed, that they don't have a firm root, like that depth of commitment or even the experience to be able to continue in the path when hard things come along. And I know from my experience being a word missionary that a lot of times people will have a lot of trials right before and right after they get baptized, because Satan is really trying to push against them making a good choice.
Yep.
And he's trying to test and see if we're serious. And so it can be really hard for new members to continue to come because Satan's throwing extra attacks at them.
Yeah, well, and even if we're not talking about our church, but just with any, one that hears the word of Christ and kind of it touches their heart, and it touches them in a way that where they're like, hey, I want to hear more, or I want to kind of be like that. But then they get with their other friends that they're used to hanging out with, and they're like, why are you talking to those people? Why are you doing that? Because, we're cool over here and they're boring over there. And that may be where, like, it gets scorched by the sun.
Yep. Absolutely. To quote President Oakes again, he says, if we are not rooted in the teachings of the gospel and regular in its practices, any one of us can develop a stony heart, which is stony ground for spiritual seeds. So we need to put in the effort and the work to have that regular time in the scriptures, have consistent prayers, participate and prepare for lessons in church. And then he goes on and says this really great metaphor. He says, spiritual food is necessary for spiritual survival. especially in a world that is moving away from belief in God and absolutes of right and wrong. In an age dominated by the internet, which magnifies messages that menace faith, we must increase our exposure to spiritual truth in order to strengthen our faith and stay rooted in the gospel.
Wow. Yeah.
And I just love the idea that, like, even if we have a stony ground, or we have a shallow seed that's rooted in a shallow part of our life,
Yeah.
we need to do the work to make sure that it doesn't stay shallow.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's really easy to, I mean, and I think for a long time, like, I had a lot of shallow seeds which is why I would go to church and not go to church. And then, but I mean, it wasn't really just that. It was usually having to do with things that were going on in my life. Like when I was younger, like when I first decided to step away from the church, I was 17, right?
Mm-hmm.
My parents were divorced when I was like 3, and I was living with my dad at the time when I went to high school, because I wanted to go to high school up in Layton instead of in Gunnison where my mom lived. And, there was a lot of things going on there where I knew my dad was playing the righteous priesthood holder, but I knew he was not. And so that really bothered me. It was like, what is the point of this? What is the point of this? Going to church every Sunday and pretending to be holier than thou, and then going the rest of the week and doing the things that you do. And I'm like, and my 17-year-old brain was like, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be a part of that hypocrisy. That's dumb.
Yeah, that's a perfect word, is hypocrisy. You saw that even then, that you're like, if this is how everyone is,
no thanks.
I don't want a part of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And of course, that's an immature way of looking at it, but that's a 17-year-old way of looking at it, And I think a lot of teenagers fall into that, where and this is why it's so important to set a good example, because if you don't, your kids see that, your kids see that you're doing one thing on Sunday, and then the rest of the week you're doing other things that they've been taught are not so great, right? And that you've even taught them are not so great. You're saying, don't do that. But then you go and do it, and they see that.
Yeah.
And so it comes down to being, you have to be a good example. And we have to be good examples to other people, because other people are watching us too.
Yeah.
When you're trying to teach somebody about Christ, and you're saying one thing and you're doing another, that just translates to you aren't real. You don't really believe.
Yeah.
What you're saying.
And you haven't allowed the gospel to change your natural man and your natural inclination to perhaps be unkind or be judgmental or whatever it is, like, to allow the gospel to change how you behave and how you interact with other people. Because ultimately, to me, that's what conversion is.
Yeah.
Is that you don't just believe, but you change how you behave because of what you believe. Now,
does that mean that we're perfect and we always do everything right and we're always a good example? No.
No, that's unrealistic.
That is unrealistic. And I'm not saying that. I'm not saying, oh, well, I'm a follower of Christ, so watch everything I do and I do everything perfect. No, not at all.
No.
But it also comes down to, where you're not doing something so egregious that it's so obvious that you're not following.
Yeah, and the goal really is to be a light, like we talked about last week, to allow people to be like, she's really interesting. I wonder where she gets that attitude. And the idea is that we point people to Christ.
Yeah.
Like, if the only exposure to Christ that people get is through us, we need to hopefully have a good experience of showing them what being Christ-like is like, in hopes that not that they will like praise us,
right,
but that they will want
praise
to
God.
know more about Christ.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, is we have to not be doing it to look at me, look how good I am.
Yes.
It's look at God.
Absolutely.
But this brings me to verse 7, and it says, and some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them.
Okay.
So are we, when we're out in the world showing people who Christ is, are we, are we being thorny?
Ooh.
Or are we being good soil? Or are we being thorny? if we say, if we're spreading the word and people are hearing it and it's, and they're hearing it, but then they're recognizing us as like seeing how we act outside of that connection, is it thorny?
Yeah.
I don't know that, and that's just one way to look at it. I don't think that's what that verse means, but that just came to my mind.
Oh, that's fine. We can interpret and expound scripture. Absolutely.
I mean, it actually just means that, like, there's some are going to fall in patches of thorns that are going to, other places that are going to teach them about other things other than Christ, and it's going to choke them.
Absolutely. And if we look further on when Christ explains it, he says that the thorns that choke them are the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the lusts of other things entering in, choking the word and becoming unfruitful. So this is, again, kind of what we talked about in the beginning, is other things getting in the way of the seed being planted in our hearts.
And so it's like they heard it and then it just got choked out.
Yeah. And other things became a priority.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's another reason for us to kind of, when you're fostering that, when you're talking to other people about Christ and you're trying to get them to understand how Christ loves them and how Christ can make their lives better, you have to not, it can't just be like, oh, hi, I'm Melissa, and do you want to hear about Jesus? And Jesus is great, and then never talk to them again. That's kind of a reductive way of doing it. But you know what I'm saying? Yeah. If you don't foster that, if you don't keep preaching that, or if you don't keep trying to foster that in that person that you're talking to, then they don't get deep roots.
Absolutely. You have to continue that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. So then in verse 8 it says, but others fell into good ground and brought forth fruit, and some 100-fold, some 60-fold, and some 30-fold. So this is where it's like, okay, it found good soil, right? The seeds found good soil, and it got planted, and it sprung up, and it was fruitful, right? Mm-hmm. But some were more fruitful than others. It's probably the quality of the soil, or whatever.
So this is what we're shooting for. We want to be the good ground and bring forth good fruit,
right?
And I think it's interesting that he says both things, both that we have good soil to absorb the teachings of the gospel, but also that we bring forth good fruit,
right?
And if we think about what Paul teaches in the New Testament, we know people by the fruits of their spirit and by the fruits of their labor. So it's not just that we hear the word, it's that our fruits are positive. So again, what we said, we don't want to have the hypocrisy. We want to be an example of Jesus Christ and bring people to him and allow what we allow to be planted in our hearts to bring forth more good in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in verse 9, he says, who hath ears to hear, let him hear. So it's for the word for everybody to hear. If you have ears to hear and you want to hear, then this is who it's for, right? And then the disciples they ask the question in verse 10, and the disciples came and said unto him, why speakest thou unto them in parables? So they're saying, why don't you just tell them? Why are you spinning this seed story?
Yeah. they want it straight.
And he answered in verse 11, he says, he answered and said unto them, because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. Now, what does that mean?
So that brings me back to those verses that we cited in the beginning about the ones that were, that got trampled, is that we have to seek to learn and seek to find greater depth in the gospel of Jesus Christ and to hear the deeper meaning.
Right.
Because even when we talked about last week about the parable of the 10 virgins, it's about the oil, yes. But it's also the reason that Christ, and I was thinking about this week that we didn't get to really touch on as much, but it's about the oil. But the reason he turns them away is because he doesn't know them.
Right.
It's not because they don't have enough oil.
Right. Oh, good point. Yeah, it's because they weren't.
They didn't have a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Right.
And so the idea comes to me that, like, if we want to really know these parables, we have to seek for the deeper meaning. It's not just about like do the right thing. Like even if we think about the Sermon on the Mount,
Yeah.
that is when Christ gives us the higher and holier way, was
Right.
what President Nelson would
Right.
call it, is that we are not just to not kill, we are not to be angry with our brother.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
There is a deeper command that we have from the New Testament, from the fulfillment of the law. It's not just about, we'll let the seed take root in your heart. It's, but bring forth good fruit.
Right. So you can't just like hear the words and accept them and you get them deeply rooted within yourself. You have to go out and give it to other people.
Yeah. And you have to look deeper at the parables to really get them. You have to study them, which is why we're doing this.
That's why we're doing it.
And because God has more for us to learn if we are paying attention. And again, what we talked about last time, that we will know when the Savior is coming because we are children of light and we're paying attention.
Right. Yeah. And it just brings to mind, like, also it's saying, and the kingdom but to them it is not given to us. So if he's saying, the reason he's talking in parables is if people want to hear, if they want to hear him to understand, they will hear it and they will understand it. Like the Pharisees, they listened to his parables all the time. They heard him speak and they didn't get it.
No, they're like, you're a false prophet. We're going to stone you, or we're going to do this. And you're healing people on the Sunday. And you're like, dude, you're missing the point.
Because
I just healed this dude.
Because they were, to them, it was not given. To them it was not given because they didn't have ears to hear, because we're said in verse, who hath ears to hear, let them hear, in verse 9.
Yeah, and to me, the thing that got in the way of the Pharisees is pride. Absolutely.
And pride is a killer of a lot of things.
Absolutely.
I mean, it absolutely is a thorn that strangles.
Yes, absolutely. I want to read another part of President Oak's talk. He gives a really good discord. He says, the Savior's examples could cause us to think of this parable as the parable of the soils, not the parable of the sower.
Oh.
The suitability of the soil depends upon the heart of each one of us who is exposed to the gospel seed. In susceptibility to spiritual teachings, some hearts are hardened and unprepared, some hearts are stony from disuse, and some hearts are set upon the things of the world.
That is really good, because when he says that the soils are, like, you don't plant seeds in bad soil.
No,
like
it's not going to work.
If you are a person who plants, which I am not.
I did that in 2020 and hope to do it again next year.
Yes, Melissa planted a whole garden, and so she learned a lot about
and
good soil and bad soil.
What the first thing I did was replace all the soil. Because Las Vegas dirt is garbage.
It's garbage. It's caliche.
It's stony and sandy
and you cannot
hard.
dig in it.
It's so hard to dig. So I bought this like purposely rich, wonderful soil that was really good for produce and tomatoes, and replaced my whole garden.
Yeah,
bed.
Because you have to. Because like if anybody has tried to dig in Las Vegas soil, you know what I'm talking about. It's literally like rock.
Yeah, and it's funny. So I had a cool thing happen when I did my garden in 2020. I planted a bunch of tomatoes, and I had this one tomato plant that was very resilient. It almost got killed by tomato hornworms a couple of times, and I continued to get it back, and I had tomatoes in November. It was crazy.
Yeah, that's right. I remember. It was weird.
They never turned red, but I had lots of fried green tomatoes, and it was great. But I remember when I pulled it out, because I was going to do another season. I was going to do a winter season and do like lettuce and broccoli and stuff. And I pulled out the root of the tomato plant that had been so resilient. And when I pulled out the root, I had maybe 6 or 12 inches of that good soil.
Wow.
And there was the crappy soil underneath, because I could only dig so deep and buy so much soil. I didn't want to like go crazy. And so when I pulled that plant out, the roots went down a little bit, but they went side to side for like 6 feet.
Yeah, because they couldn't get through the hard dirt.
Because
so they went
the
sideways.
hard dirt was garbage, and they kept growing their roots in the good soil.
That is a really good metaphor.
I just thought of it.
I know. Because I mean, it means that like if you're rooted in Christ, right? And you run into hard soil or hard ground, it's a trial, right? But it doesn't mean that your root or your seed has to die.
Ooh, I like that.
It means that you have a trial that you now have to endure and figure a new way to a new path.
Yeah. So it may have been weird that I had to pull my roots from 2 different directions that could have choked out my other plants, but it didn't. But like, I pulled it in a different way. And I remember it's like pulling it out and then taking a picture of it because it was so strange, but so cool to show the resilience of that plant to like seek out any of the good soil it could.
And that was the plant that almost died by tomato hornworms
more than once.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, it was like a really resilient little
I was like,
there.
I want to be like that tomato plant.
I know. Like, be like that tomato plant.
Yeah.
Like, you can suffer through worms and you can suffer through hard soil and all the things, and you can still grow.
Yep.
And you can still flourish and you can still produce fruit, right?
Yeah. And if we think about, this even brings me back to the parable of the olive tree in Jacob 5, which I hadn't planned on bringing up, but the whole idea is that the gardener is doing what it can to help the plants to thrive.
Right.
And so even if we pull back a little bit more on this parable, the seed is the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But perhaps the gardener is Christ.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And trying his best to plant seeds in our hearts and hoping that they will spring up and bring forth fruit. But he's also going to do what he can to have good things happen so that we are in a place to receive those things and to try and mitigate those trials. And even if they're hard, he's going to do what he can to make it easier, because like we've talked about before, we're not immune from trials when we follow Christ, but he's going to be there with us, beside us.
And he might be giving you a different path to get what you need.
Yeah.
You know, just like the tomato plant. So I think that's great. I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah.
So he's talking about in verse 13, therefore I speak to them in parables. He's saying his answer to them is basically like, I speak to them in parables because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. So he's trying to speak to them in a way that they will understand.
Yeah. And I love that he talks in such simple terms. All of the parables that he talks about are very everyday type of things. You know, this is a time in history where most people probably had plants and animals and worked hard every day for a living, and they knew what these things meant.
Yeah.
And they could just liken them to the gospel.
Right.
And so he's not trying to be like this overly complicated, like ridiculous scholar of like
like the Pharisees.
Craziness. Yeah. He's trying to be like, you get this. You have sheep. You have plants.
Yeah.
You know.
He was talking to fishermen. He was talking to, you know, everyday people who just, you know, grew gardens because that's how they ate back then, you know, because they would take their stuff that they grew and sell it at the market, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So this, I mean, it's very much real world stuff that he's talking to them about. And so that's why it's interesting that, like, people like the Pharisees, they just heard him talking about seeds and sowing seeds.
Yeah.
And they didn't liken it to, you know, anything spiritual.
Absolutely. And they got caught focusing on the wrong thing. And even just the idea of the simpleness of it being so powerful about how seeds are planted in different types of soil.
Yeah.
There's a quote from President Uchtdorf where he talks about sometimes people, and actually it's probably a scripture too. Hold on. It reminds me of one of Paul's letters talks about how the simpleness of the word can sometimes distract people.
Right.
That we make it more complicated than it needs to be. And President Uchtdorf has said that the gospel is so simple that a child can understand it.
Yes.
But it's still so complex that you can spend your life studying it.
Oh, totally. And you'll find new stuff every time.
Yeah, I feel like I wish I could know all the scriptures so well, and there's so much of it that I'm just like I still feel like I'm always behind.
Yeah. Oh, I'm constantly behind because I don't study like Melissa does.
but just the idea that like I think the Pharisees made it complicated.
They did.
Christ was like, allow the word to be planted in your heart, and then like we said earlier, you know, it's not just about following the law, like don't kill, but don't be angry with your brother.
Right.
Somehow they saw that as more complicated, or they're like, well, what about all the rules on the Sabbath? You can't pick up your mat, you can't heal, and
you can't walk so many steps.
Yeah, you're missing the point. Like you're making it overly complicated, and you're missing the spirit of it.
I wanted to bring up verse 21, and I know it's kind of like we've already talked about the root, but it's like, it says, yet he hath not root in himself, but dureth for a while. For when tribulation or persecution ariseth because of the word, and by he is offended. Okay. So when I read this, okay, let me go back to 20. It says, but he that received the seed into stony places, the same is he that heareth the word, and anon with joy receiveth it. I think he's saying it's not receiving it with joy. Yes. It goes on to say, yet he hath not root in himself, but dureth for the while. For when tribulation or persecution ariseth because of the word, and by he is offended. So this is where we're talking about people that have heard the word, right? People who've accepted the word, and then somebody does something or says something, or they get into a trial, and they all of a sudden abandon everything they knew about Jesus or the gospel, and were like, you know, well, I'm in this trial and God wouldn't do me like this, so I don't believe anymore. Or this person was super rude to me at church, to heck with that. It's just the same thing I did with when I was 17 and decided that I wasn't going anymore. I was like, you know, my dad is like not living the way he says that I should be living, and so I'm not going to go to this stupid church anymore, because why? And it, you know, those are I didn't have a root. I didn't have a root to pull from. And those are the people that kind of like fall away. And it reminds me of, in the Book of Mormon, of the tree of life. So Lehi has a vision while he's out in the wilderness with his family. He has this vision of the tree of life, and he sees himself going, you know, following along this path. It's a dark path, but there's a rod of iron to hold on to, and it leads to this tree with this glorious fruit, right? And he gets there and he partakes of it, and he's like, I want everybody to take of this. I want my family. Where's my family? He's looking around for his family. He sees Nephi and Sam and his wife, and he beckons them to come. And
probably his daughters that he doesn't talk about.
Probably them too. And he beckons them to come, and they make it up there, and they partake of the fruit. And then he's looking around for Laman and Lemuel, right? And he sees them wandering in strange passages, is what it calls it, or something like that. Like off in the darkness, and they're, you know, he's yelling to them, and they're not responding. And then up above, there's this building, this great and spacious building, where there's a bunch of people who dress really fine, and there's probably loud music, and there's probably all this merriment happening up there. And they're looking down on the tree of life, and they're making fun of the people that are taking the fruit. Right. So that brings me to this. There's a general overview of that vision.
Very well done. Thank you.
So that brings me to this verse, which made me think of it right away, because it's talking about, you know, people who've heard the word, and then, but when they get persecuted, or when they have a tribulation, or when they get offended, they abandon it. And there were people that he talks about in that vision that made their way all the way up to the tree of life and partook of it and were really happy. And then they saw the people in the building above making fun of them, and they fell away. And so this kind of correlates. This parable of the sower made me think of that vision. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's really astute, because absolutely there's the idea that we get there and then we see what other people are doing that aren't members of the church or aren't converted, and they're making fun of you. And in this day and age, it's hard to be a Christian. It's hard to be a Latter-day Saint. I don't know if you know, but Hulu hates Mormons.
Oh, yeah. I've seen.
There's so many documentaries and shows that just paint us in the most horrible light. And it just makes me so sad.
I know.
And it's like the fringe of people in the church.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to say that we aren't all unique and different and have our struggles, but sometimes they shouldn't be on TV.
Right.
You know,
it leads people astray. It's one of those things that they're the great and spacious building. If we want to look at Hulu, like the great and spacious
that's
building,
where it is. Come watch Hulu with us. This is not sponsored by Hulu.
I'm sorry. But I don't think Hulu's going to be listening to this. But
That's good.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, we do. I mean, and in this age, especially, okay, think of what our kids are growing up in, or what my kid is growing up in, what your kids are growing up in the age of social media. Everything is out there.
Yeah,
everything.
And again, people are criticizing both inside and outside of the church, how you're acting, what you're doing, and that's really hard place to be in. And if you're struggling with mental health or with self-esteem or confidence, when you have someone, whether they're important to you or not, making fun of how you live your life, in a way that it can be difficult to be different and choose the right and make good choices and make more conservative choices than the general public, it's really hard.
It is. And especially, I'm glad you brought up mental health again, because this is that correlation again. There are a lot of an entire generation, I will say, and my daughter is part of this, an entire generation that is, I think in some way, a little bit has some sort of mental illness struggles.
Yeah.
And it's because they've had 24/7 access, which is something we didn't grow up with.
No.
To news feeds, to social media, to everything in your face all day long.
Yeah.
Everything in your face all day long. And it's made for a very anxious and depressed generation.
Absolutely.
And so it's so when you're looking at that, it is really hard for kids that grew up on social media. They've got people who are cyberbullying them on social media. So to be a different kind of person, to be different from the secular world, and having that kind of pressure coming at you 24/7, imagine that.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of a verse in the New Testament that we are to be a peculiar people.
And we are.
We're supposed to be different, and sometimes it's really hard. And for me, when I was a kid, I just wanted to be like everyone else. And sometimes now I feel that too. Yeah. Like as an adult, like I want to be blank like her, whatever, like fill in whatever insecurity you have.
Yeah.
Like we want to be like everyone else. And I've had to wrestle with a lot of things of I get to be different because it's my life. Yeah. I'm a single mom. That's hard. It's different. Like in many of my circles, I'm the only one that's divorced.
Well, and
I could make myself, I could have a pity party for myself, or I could be like, I get a break and you don't, you know?
And maybe in some ways, I guess in the secular world, that's not so odd. There are a lot of single parents in the secular world, but I guess in our world, it is somewhat, I mean, I guess it's a little more normal than it used to be.
Yeah. And it's, you know, just an example that we all have things where we feel like the odd one out. And that can be a thorn in our side that makes us want to make a different choice and pull away from the gospel because we think, surely if God loved me, he wouldn't put me through this thing.
Right.
But that's not how it goes.
Surely if God loved me, he would want me to stay with the man he told me to marry.
Yeah.
Right?
We did talk about that last time. Yes, but that man has agency, unfortunately.
Yes.
So it's hard because we want to believe that when we do the right thing and we follow Christ and we follow God, that things are going to work out. But
sometimes they don't.
Sometimes a greater test of our faith is if we can make it through the hard things and still believe. If we can have, you know, a heat storm in our garden and still make it through and bear some fruit.
Right.
And say, okay, it wasn't me, it was the gardener who helped me get through.
Right. Absolutely. And give credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we are too quick to give ourselves credit.
Yeah.
And not that we shouldn't have some credit for sticking it out and not being the offended or person who walks away.
Yeah.
You know, but it's still Christ that got you through that trial.
Absolutely.
You know?
And that's really where we want us to be at the end of the day when we think about this parable, is that we need to do what we can to allow our hearts and our soil to be welcoming to the seed to be planted in our heart. And it reminded me of the talk from, so Michelle Craig spoke about this concept in October of 2018. She was a counselor in the Young Women General Presidency, and she talked about divine discontent. And this was a concept that was initially brought by Elder Neal A. Maxwell. And she just talks about the idea of the discontent, the distance between who we are and what we have the power to become. And I think it's really easy to get caught in like this part of, I want to be like everyone else. I want to be strong in this. I don't want to have this trial. I want to have more friends. I want to make more money, whatever it is. I want my kids to be okay. Like, there's so many things that we have this thing that's not to the point where we want it to be. And that can be a point where we can have this amount of frustration and can cause us to have distrust with God because of that distance between where we are at and where we want to be.
Yeah.
But I love that it's a divine discontent, because the way that we fill that gap is through bringing Christ into the process.
Absolutely. And I'm just going along in Matthew 13, and it brings up another parable that goes along, I think, well with the sowers, which is the parable of the wheat and the tares. So if you go into 24, another parable put he forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. So,
not gonna lie, I do not remember that it was the evil dude who did the tares.
I did not either. I just read that and I was like, no way.
I was like, what?
No
what
way.
A jerk.
So, I mean, this kind of goes to your point of we can be trying to sow, good seed in our field, and someone else can come along and throw a tare in there.
Like, here's some doubt. Here's a trial.
Here's
some mental health issues.
Here's some,
here's a loss of a job.
Whatever.
You know, have some trials. Yeah. Happy birthday.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's there's always going to be some outside opposition, right?
Yeah.
And that outside opposition is, coming from Satan, but, also from other people using their free will, right?
Yeah, we cannot control what else is in our garden, unfortunately. We live in the time when Satan is loose. Can't wait for the millennium for that.
Yes, please go away.
And this is part of the test of our faith. God asks us to prove him herewith in Doctrine and Covenants, to prove that we can soldier on and continue in the faith no matter what comes our way.
Right, because we are going to encounter tares in our field. And we have to choose how we're going to deal with that, right? Are we going to let the tares overrun the field, or are we going to go and pull them out?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to think, like, could we think about the tares as being external or internal things, or both?
I'm sure they could be both.
Yeah.
I mean, but I guess, yeah, for sure it could be both. I mean, I feel like, speaking of mental health, that's a big tear.
Yep.
Because that's something that people that are afflicted with that, they have to deal with that every day.
Yeah.
And it's not like as simple as going out, I'm going to go weed my garden.
Yeah.
That's like a weed that's got some serious roots.
Yeah.
But like, you need some serious weed killer for that.
Yeah. Like medication, which is great.
Right. But even that isn't, it's not, I mean, it's
not
hard.
an end-all be-all.
It's not an end all be all. There has to be medication with therapy, with,
lifestyle changes.
It also has to be with having good soil around you. Or support system around you.
Yep.
Because if you don't have that, you got no shot.
Yeah.
And that's, but yeah, so it is, the tares are external, they're internal, they're all around.
We don't live in a vacuum.
I wish.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
But there would be no growth in a vacuum.
No, that'd be very boring. I think we get bored. Yeah.
the point of these parables that we've brought up in the vision of the, tree of life, they all kind of correlate, is that we need to be good, good seeds. We need to be good soil for the seeds, I should say. The seeds are, the word. We need to be good soil, because if we aren't good soil, then it's just going to dry up and go nowhere, and it helps no one. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help your family. It doesn't help your friends. It doesn't help your community. It just doesn't help at all. And we need to also be, good examples to people.
Yeah, we want to be true to ourselves and true to being a child of God.
Not perfect, but true.
Yeah. I want to end with another quote from the Divine Discontent Talk. It says, "Each of us, if we are honest, feel a gap between where and who we are and where and who we want to become." So if you're feeling like your soil is leaves a little bit to be desired, that's okay. Mm-hmm. She continues on and says, "We yearn for greater personal capacity. We have these feelings because we are daughters and sons of God, born with the light of Christ, yet living in a fallen world. These feelings of God are given and create an urgency to act. We should welcome feelings of divine discontent that call us to a higher way while recognizing and avoiding Satan's counterfeit, paralyzing discouragement. There is a precious space into which Satan is all too eager to jump. We can choose to walk the higher path that leads us to seek for God and his peace and grace, or we can listen to Satan, who bombards us with the messages that we will never be enough, rich enough, smart enough, beautiful enough, anything enough. Our discontent can become divine or destructive." So I just challenge you guys to think about where your soil is at and be honest with yourselves. I shared earlier that God was like, "Stop being late for church, Melissa." I give you a break, but it's over. And I took that, and I want to be better, and I want to show my kids that church is important. Not just because I want to show my kids, but because it's important to me.
Yeah.
And I fill my cup by going to church, and I strengthen my relationship with Jesus Christ by going to church. And I do not like that I'm late. I don't like it.
Yeah.
It's divine discontent for me, for sure.
Oh, well, I'm glad you realize that.
Yeah. And I needed a little push to be like, come on. and it feels little, but it also feels like a big deal.
Yeah.
And any effort that we make to change, to soften our hearts, to listen to what God has to say to us, to make ourselves more able to hear what he has to say to us, the more reward we're going to have, and the more deep relationship we're going to have with Jesus Christ, who's going to give us the strength to deal with all those hard things. Because when we rely on him, it might not be better, but it will be easier, because his yoke is easy and his burden is light.
Absolutely. I love that. And I just want to add my testimony to that I love Jesus, and I love that all the things that he gives to me. And I love even the hard times and the challenges that he gives me, the tears that I have to deal with in my own life. And sometimes I curse it, but I know that it is for my own growth, and I know that it is for me to learn something. And if we can take it in that stride and know that that's something that we need to learn, and that we need to then maybe pass on to somebody else once we've learned it, it's how Jesus gets it's how the seeds get spread, and it's how they take hold in people. And so I would just challenge everybody that if you have any tears in your life, or you have any struggles, to maybe not wish them away, but maybe try to see how you can learn from what it is that he's trying to teach you in that moment.
Yeah. And I love the idea of just bringing more beauty to the garden around us and helping others, even when we're in our trial, because we can make a difference even if we're struggling.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us, and look for another episode in a couple weeks where we will be discussing the prodigal son.
Yes,
right?
Prodigal son and the parable of the lost sheep.
Yes.
Will go hand in hand. So
tune in next time.
Okay, thanks for being here.